Hey there, this is Ashley Feraude and you're listening to People Stories, the podcast about the people behind the professions. For this third episode, I'm joined in conversation by Laurence Kain. Now, I know Laurence very well, he's a good friend of mine, and I figured it was about time that he became a friend of yours too. He's got a really interesting backstory about where he came from and what he's achieved, and that is what many of you know, which is Capital Brewing Co. This podcast has been made possible thanks to Mercedes-Benz Canberra. The team at Fishwick have been very supportive of this project. I hope you enjoy this third episode of People Stories. Hey Laurence, how are you?
I'm good, man. How are you?
Oh, it's good to see you. And we've been friends for a long time.
Probably over 15 years.
Oh my God, over 15 years. We're showing our age a little bit. And I think our friendship actually began when you were working at Trinity. Am I right about that?
Yeah, that's right. And you were DJing at Trinity.
I was DJing, and you were managing the place though, right?
I started there as a bartender, and then I was, within a couple of years I was there on and off, and then I ended up managing it.
Yeah, cool.
Yeah.
Well, before we go down that whole path and kind of figure out how you got to where you are right now with Capital Brewing Co., which is obviously of interest to people, let's go back a little bit before that. So before the bartending days, what were you doing with yourself? How did you get to that point?
So I went to Rudolf Steiner School for primary and high school, and then I ended up doing year 10 work experience in a bar in Braddon called All Saints. So when I was 16, I was working behind a bar. That's when I started pulling my first beer, and I've pretty much never stopped.
16 is quite young, obviously, to be doing that, right?
Yeah, this was the previous iteration of the Liquor Act when you were allowed to do that.
Exactly. But what I'm actually getting at is more the fact that at 16, you obviously knew that's what you wanted to do. Was that hospitality and entertaining people, was that right from the start, the vision that you had through like high school?
Yeah, so through high school, I always looked up to, it sounds kind of strange, but looked up to waiters and chefs and people working behind bars because I just really enjoyed the idea of, showing people a good time in a venue and serving people, and I still do. And that's still something that I really love about hospitality. And I knew from an early age that I wanted to go and study hotel management.
Yep.
So when I finished school in year 12 at Narrabundah College, I ended up going to hotel school. And that lasted, I think, for 2 years. And then I moved over. A friend of mine, actually, that I was working with had moved to London, working for the Match Bar Group. And he was working for them and managed to score me a job in Match Bar as a bartender. And it was quite difficult to get a job there. You had to sit an exam and you had to do it, all this different stuff.
It's not just somebody that you know or they happen to need somebody for the night. Like you actually had to work your way to that particular position.
Yeah, exactly right. Yeah, and you have to be quite committed to knowledge of product and this kind of stuff. So I was really into cocktail bartending, and, I went to the Cocktail World Cup with Bacardi and 42 Below vodka. And got into that through working at Trinity, where I met you, and then ended up working at Hippo Bar in the city, which was quite funny because I worked there for Sasha while I was setting up my first business, Foreshore, with Kicks Entertainment.
So actually just on that, so when you were doing the bar work in that first couple of years and everything else, did you think at that point that the end goal was to own your own bar, be a professional bartender ongoingly? Where was your head at that point?
Well, where I'd actually come to was that I'd done an internship in a large hotel, and I realized relatively quickly that I didn't want to work in that industry. Yeah. I was actually quite lost, and it was not a particularly pleasant time.
And how old would you have been then?
Probably 23, 24.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, no, 22.
Okay.
22. And I decided to study marketing, business development, which was like marketing, a mix of marketing and finance, with a little bit of law thrown in. And I did that. And my final year assignment was in the marketing area, was for an event called Block Party, which we put on out the back of Trinity Bar in Dixon. And the guy that owned that bar was absolutely batshit crazy. He was a lovely guy, but he was pretty wild, and he was an Irish guy. And I went into his office with my end of year assignment. I'd gone to a lot of detail. Like I'd done a lot more detail and work on it than I needed to, but I got really interested in it. And he read the assignment. He's like, oh, fuck. Oh, this is a pretty fucking good idea, isn't it? Well, let's fucking do it then, eh? And I think I'd put a budget on it of 60 grand or something like that.
Yeah.
Total operating costs, acts and stage and all of that. And the idea behind it was raising money for for Oxfam for water projects in Indigenous communities, which was pretty cool. So we managed to raise $10,000. That was my first ever event. And I had no idea at all what I was doing. I was a bar manager that was studying marketing. And I had a bunch of friends come around me, Cole Bennetts and Jim Medcraft and Steve Lind and Paul Azzopardi. And
so all the legends of the scene.
All the scene legends helped me, Paul helped me book the acts, and Jim helped me target people on MySpace before Facebook was a thing. It didn't even exist. And Cole Bennetts did all the photography and a number of other things. I think you helped me in a number of different ways as well, some design.
I was there, and that's right, I did the flyer design for it.
Yeah.
I remember the days specifically. I remember going there actually wondering what a block party actually was. Realized, and here I thought, you'd have someone playing out of their truck somewhere, but it was a proper setup. You had fences and gates, and people, stamped you when you walked in, and there was a bar, and there was music, and there's a whole atmosphere which came with it, which it was actually much bigger than I was anticipating at the time.
Yeah, we sold 1,000 tickets for it. And at the time, there wasn't really any kind of festival that had happened in Canberra, Stonefest a little bit. But what we did was we pulled up a semi-trailer out the front of the venue, which I managed to talk someone into lending me for free. And we pulled the side, canvas away, and that formed the stage. And we put a fence around it. We sold a bunch of booze in a car park that we didn't really have approval to use. And off we went.
Did you model the idea of that festival, a block party per se, on something that you've seen or experienced before?
Not really. Like, I'd been to Field Day and Good Vibrations and a number of other music festivals, and I just thought about that, but on a much more condensed scale. And I did all of the financial modeling for it and the operational planning and the marketing plan for it in a reasonable amount of detail. And I go back and look at it now, I'm like, oh my God, this is woeful. Like,
well, hey, it clearly wasn't, because, by the way, did you get a good result from that assignment?
I did, yeah.
Oh, there you go. So it couldn't have been that bad. Yeah. And plus, living proof of the fact that assignment wasn't just something you wrote up to get a good mark and forget about. It was a living, breathing bit of work that essentially eventuated in a massive festival.
Yeah, it was pretty fun. I mean, that was the first event that I really did. But it was a tremendous amount of work, like a phenomenal amount of unpaid work. And I, countless hours put into doing that, and then leading into it, days before and days after, you on your feet for 15, 16, 17 hours a day. Of
course.
But that was really the catalyst for me realizing that I love entertaining. I love throwing parties. And I then recognized that there was a pretty hungry market for that kind of activity in Canberra. And came up with the idea for Foreshore, which happened.
How do you get around the fact that a lot of people in your position, even if they thought they had the skill to do the things that you were doing, pretty much stop at the financial investment bit? It just becomes overwhelming and actually a little bit scary to head straight into a project of that sort. I mean, clearly you were passionate about what you wanted to do. You could easily see an end goal. So all of that was there. But did you have any fear going into that festival and hiring staff and, all that stuff, that things might go wrong and all might go belly up? Or did it not really matter because it was technically somebody else's money?
Well, with Block Party, yeah, there's always that concern. And I was using, because I was working for that venue operator, I was using his money to do that. And he was funding the entire operation. We donated the money from the door to the charity, but he, retained the profit from the bar.
Yeah.
So, I was working for him, and, I was essentially managing his business. So, obviously I was concerned for the financial viability of the operation.
But it wasn't personal risk, which made it a bit easier. Yeah.
And when, that changes, 9 months down the track when we're doing Foreshore in Commonwealth Place.
Which is why I'm leading into that, because they didn't have an investor. That was a different thing altogether. So obviously Block Party and the success of that. Did you only do one of those, or was there more?
I think we did 3 of them.
Yeah, I thought there was more.
I think we did 3.
So the success of them, essentially, you got better each time you did it, and kind of realized how you can upscale and make it larger. And then the opportunity for Foreshore came from that?
Yeah, well, I did one Block Party and then developed the idea for Foreshore, and then sort of connected with the guys, Paul Azzopardi and his business partner at the time, Jeff Drake. They pulled together the artist side of things, and we pulled together the site management side of things, a lot of the marketing, a lot of the on-ground stuff that happened, and they were working full time, so a lot of the strategy and the planning, execution for that event, which is a tremendous amount of work when you're dealing with the National Capital Authority and the Australian Federal Police and the ambulance service.
And once again, something that hasn't happened before.
Exactly
so it's
right.
Untested ground and permits and bits and pieces.
In the Parliamentary Triangle, right on the edge of the lake in a very prominent location. So there was a phenomenal amount of work went into that. And I was actually at the time working for a hospitality consulting company, and we'd set up over the time, just after I did Block Party, I went and resigned from my position at the bar, and I was offered this job working for a hospitality consulting company and set up the food and beverage side of Hotel Realm, or I was involved in setting that up, and at the same time developing the idea for Foreshore while I was still working. And then in about July, I worked in that job for maybe 6 months. In about July, I went, you know what? I think I've got to free up a little more time. So that's when I actually threw in the towel at my full-time suit-wearing real job, which is the first and only one that I've ever had. And it lasted 6 months.
Yeah, the only other time I've ever seen you in a suit was at your wedding, but that's about it.
Yeah. Right now I'm in a pair of pajamas at your house.
We'd rather not paint the picture for the audience.
But at any rate, this was around the time I met my wife, and I sat down, and we'd been dating for a few months, and I said, hey, I'm actually going to quit my job and try and get this business going. And she looked at me like I was just absolutely, completely insane.
So much for support.
Yeah. She does pretty well for herself as well.
I know. So
she's been the breadwinner in our house for a while.
Do you think, actually, just on that though, with your partner, do you think because her career is more traditional in a sense, and she does exceptionally well in it, it's in accounting, am I right?
Yeah, financial consulting. Yeah.
So do you think, looking at what you were proposing, which seems pretty wild in comparison to the structures within financial consulting, do you think some of that mistrust must have just come out of the fact that it's such an unknown and variable place to be, as opposed to the kind of career professionally that other people take? Yeah,
I mean, a tremendous amount of risk, and she comes from a more traditional kind of family that is very tertiary education focused, which is cool. Both my parents, my dad was a university professor, and so they were quite tertiary education focused as well. But yeah, I think because it was a fairly non-traditional path. But then once she saw the first Foreshore and she saw what it was all about, she's actually become one of the most valuable sort of business assets and advisors that I've had.
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
Especially since a lot of the things that you talk about is actually the financial planning, the marketing strategy, and that part of it. And then obviously, clearly the financial planning part of it is a counterpoint to all of this.
Yeah.
Actually, I meant to ask this question. People that go to festivals, and they might even know you loosely, would kind of presume that a lot of people who put on festivals and manage them do it because of the art. In other words, the music. They're either into it themselves, or, they really want to put on a party, and that's where it sits. My reading of you is that, even knowing you through the years and everything else, and you have always been into music, and we've had good debates about what's good and what's bad, but I actually thought you weren't as invested in that side of it as loving the business end and making all those parts work towards something successful. Would I be right about that you're less about the party, and were at least, and more about the intelligence of a successful business?
Yeah, so my enjoyment from it derived, I guess, from operating a good business of its kind. And to me, the definition of that is something that, generates a reasonable earnings after tax.
Yeah.
So, I mean, if you're not operating the thing, efficiently from an economic point of view, then you're not really running a sustainable operation. So if you actually want to, provide employment and provide fees to artists and pay your suppliers, you need to have a fair amount of, economic responsibility in the way you operate. So yeah, my interest, I've got a really strong personal interest in, finance generally and investing, which is, where I spend a fair bit of time tooling around.
Yep.
But, and so that was well before I got into doing these festivals, and that kind of bled into, how do we run these things?
Yeah. And actually it struck me too, I don't know if you remember, but this is going back quite some time ago. this potential opportunity opened up for you and I to potentially own a small bar in Kingston.
Yeah.
And you and I started kind of scoping it out. And the way that we thought about it was that essentially you'd use me for the marketing, branding, that element of it, obviously, because that was my bag. You'd be sitting on the service component as well as the stock. And I remember having these conversations with you. And in the end, that opportunity wasn't the right one for us, probably for all the financial reasons that you intelligently went through. But what really struck me is the detail to which you were describing to me the differences of how profit can be made or lost based on a lot of small things that people would not consider when it comes to venues, you know. It's very, very small variables. And I remember you even like writing on a piece of paper for me that all of a $2 saving over this particular product, you know, multiplied many, many times over a couple of months actually brings in thousands or loses thousands depending how you look at it. And I remember thinking, wow, you think about all of this on such an intricate level. Whilst here I was thinking, right, what are we going to name the bar? And she would have red fluffy pillows or pink ones, you know. It was a different place to me.
Yeah, the incremental marginal gains within a business once you've got it operating can be quite astonishing once you start turning the screws.
Yeah.
And one thing that I put a lot of effort into coaching and mentoring the management staff that I have working for me, you know, whatever business I've been at. And one of the things that I really like to demonstrate to them in a budget, because I have very detailed budget management in my businesses, is the difference in any of your line item costs. If they're out by what seems like an insignificant amount for a week, how does that, or a day, how does that extrapolate out into a year? And once you extrapolate it out into a year, and all you need to do is overshoot your costs by this much a week, and all of a sudden that's $35,000 a year.
Yeah.
And if you have that on 3 line items, you know, and if you can tighten the screws on those, it's, you know, Honky Tonks, which we haven't talked about yet, was a really interesting one because we were selling hundreds of thousands of shots of vodka over the bar a year. I can't remember the exact numbers, but we worked out that our staff were overpouring, but by accident, around 2 mils on each shot. And so we really tightened the pouring up and we got 2 mils back from each shot. And that worked out to be a $50-something thousand a year saving, which was crazy. You know?
Yeah.
And
do you apply that logic all the time, including your personal life as well?
You need to be pretty careful applying that logic in your personal life or you end up divorced pretty quickly. Yeah.
It's true. And you know, it's funny because you know, being financially prudent and so forth is part of it, but people always say sometimes you just got to live a little and maybe you should just buy the lobster, you know. But like I said, I presume you're switched onto that all the time, but when it comes to your private life, I presume you don't apply those kind of very rigid rules as well, for the fear of getting divorced.
Yeah. Well, yeah, it's an interesting question actually, because one of my interests is in, you know, personal interests is in sort of financial management and investing. And yeah, how do I kind of explain that? I automate everything so that I don't have to think about it. So I just have everything automated and, you know, you're allowed to spend as much money as you want out of this pool of money.
Yeah. You know, so there's limits and there's structures within that, but you're not down to the exact dollar. Yeah.
And I mean, I drive a beaten up, you know, 10-year-old ute that's covered in scratches and marks. It's a 4-wheel drive. And, you know, I don't sort of derive satisfaction out of signaling to people via my image.
Yeah.
And, you know, I'm kind of conscious about that because it's very tempting to go, oh, it'd be really nice to go and buy a Tesla.
Yeah.
And, you know,
but then there's a judgment that comes with that and people know how expensive it is. And
it just feels a little fun. It feels a little off for me. Like I understand why some people would want to do that.
But one thing that I've always known about you, yes, you've never liked being flashy, so that's never been you. And it's actually a really nice open aspect of your character that you kind of present a very casual approach externally.
Yeah.
Not so much in the method of speech or talk, but definitely in your appearance. It's so much so that I almost think at times it's that in itself is your brand. You almost overdo it a little bit to a point, and you wear that t-shirt that's got a hole in it, and you know you won't shave for a while because you actually want people to know that that's not about this. You know, you value the conversation, you value the contact, you value the idea, but not necessarily the materialistic outcomes that might come out of that.
Yeah. I mean, look, some people need to wear suits to work because it's the uniform. But I guess if I wore a suit to work, or if I, even if I wear a collared shirt, people at the brewery are like, "What's going on today?" Or something. Like literally, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
We've got some more investors coming in.
Which is pretty funny.
I often kind of say when people comment on the clothing that I wear, I tend to say I tend to do it as a sign of respect of the people that I meet. I'm actually doing it for them. They're the ones that are looking at me, not the other way around. And that makes me feel good. Interestingly enough, I think yours is a sign of respect too. The fact that you're 100% genuine and you say, "This is me, Laurence." I like this kind of rough stuff on the outside because you see is what you get is actually a sign of respect as well.
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah, I mean, for the last 3 years, I've had a New Year's resolution, and I've never really done them before. And I had this with my wife that I was going to try and dress a little bit more. What's the word?
With finesse,
less like a 15-year-old skater that's just finished smoking cones at the skate park.
Yeah.
And by about this time of the year, I'm turning up in my Vans again. So it doesn't last long.
One thing that I wanted to ask, as you kind of moved through your career and everything else and into the business side, you were getting away from the face-to-face direct response that you'd get from people when you poured them an awesome cocktail and had a good conversation. And even obviously with the work in foreshore and everything else, I remember you were running around with the earpiece and, a jacket on, and you were controlling people. You weren't actually at the front face of that entertainment. And I'm presuming you got your kicks out of the event and seeing those tens of thousands of people really enjoying themselves. But, there was a bigger divide between the direct relationship that you had with like a one-on-one customer that you might have had at the bar. Did you miss that? Was that a problem? Or were you kind of like, hey, that's just part of the development. That's just how it is?
Yeah, no, I didn't really. I do still miss doing that. I still do miss working behind a bar, and I do still like getting behind a bar and pouring beers and chatting to customers.
Yeah.
And I still do it from time to time. But yeah, I did miss that in one way, but also I did really enjoy bringing that event to so many thousands of people and bringing that party to that many people and seeing them have a good time. And, I think we did 5 foreshore festivals.
Yeah.
And then when I left, the guys did, my business partners carried on and did one more, and then sort of took a year's break and it came back as a different event, Spilt Milk.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, I did really enjoy that element of sort of scaling up the hospitality experience, if you like. Yeah,
am I right? At some point, I remember you working, or at least setting up the bar at Candy Bar at Academy, the nightclub that was in Civic. Was that before the foreshore? Was it just the... Okay.
That was in 2004, and I was like the opening bars manager there. There was a general manager and I think an assistant general manager, and then I was kind of like a step under.
And that was before Honky Tonks?
Yeah.
Correct.
So basically it went Trinity Academy, Trinity Block Party, Foreshore, and then Honky Tonks.
Right. Okay. Yeah. Fair enough. So that's the way. And then, so how long were you at Honky Tonks, and how did the idea around specifically Capital Brewing Co. come to mind? How did that happen?
Well, that's an interesting one actually, because we, so Tom Hertel, who I was partners with in Honky Tonks, we met working at Trinity as well, where I met you.
I remember him as well. Yeah.
Yeah, and so anyway, we got talking, and I was starting to have had enough of the festival. Like, it was quite stressful. It was a very high risk kind of event, and we did quite well from it. But there came a time when I was just like, this is a little too intense. I've had my fill of doing this, and I'm kind of keen to move on and do something else. And I sort of saw the writing on the wall for festivals a little bit as well, with Big Day Out and a few other things going under. So at any rate, I started to develop this idea with Tom, and we had both worked for Sasha at Hippo, and got talking with him about it as well. And he's like, "Oh, well, look, I'm actually considering taking the lease downstairs, and I'm already fairly well progressed in the negotiation." And so he had that lease pretty much in the bag, and we were looking for a lease. And it was also useful that he was willing to go third partner with us in it as well, because I still had a fair bit of money tied up in the festival, because I hadn't exited it at that point. And so we developed that idea for Honky Tonks in 2011 and opened it in October. And it was really the first bar in Canberra that served independent Australian craft beer, and there wasn't that many around at the time. It was like Young Henry's, Grifter, Stone and Wood, Four Pines, and that was pretty much it. And so anyway, we were driving up to Sydney in a ute once every 2 weeks and loading it with 19 Young Henry's kegs. This was before they had distribution outside Newtown. And we were driving it back the next day. And we'd stay up there and have beers and get a bit loaded with Oscar and the guys, and became really good friends with them and the Grifter guys and also the guys from Four Pines. And this was in 2011, 2012. Like, shit, this is a really cool industry. Like, we love beer. We really like all the people that are working in it. Let's start looking into how we might do this. And it was super foreign. So we took a trip to America and did a road trip from LA all the way up to Portland and stopped at, in Yosemite and climbed there a bit. We were bouldering actually. And then we went to probably 35 different breweries and really got a feeling for what the scene was like over there. This was in 2012. So that's when we started planning the brewery.
Yeah.
And we were running Honky Tonks and Hippo. And then we didn't actually execute the brewery. It didn't open until 2017 because we had to develop all of the operating model for it, all of that financial planning, the CapEx plan for it, and how we were going to execute that. We had to sell 2 bars, which was, challenging.
Of course.
And to sort of draw the money together to do it, and then get our ducks in a row, and then opened a little later than we would have liked. It would have been great if we had launched it in 2015 or 2013 or just a little bit earlier.
Yeah, but now even looking back at that, that wasn't really a problem. I mean, considering the success of Capital right now, what's that period, right? It just probably seemed like a lot at the time because you're waiting to kind of develop an idea and actually see it to come to life. But in the scheme of things and all the things that you talk about, it seems like quite a minute amount of time.
Yeah, I think that time spent planning was actually pretty effective. And it's a funny thing because some people, I don't try to mean to blow my own trumpet here, but some people in the beer industry go, oh my God, you came from nowhere and all of a sudden you're selling 1.5 million litres of beer a year. And it's like an overnight success almost. And in my head, I'm like, I was actually planning that since 2012.
It's not overnight.
Yeah, I put a lot of thought into that. I don't say that, but it's like, we're pumping along all right. It's been a pretty interesting ride with Capital because if I'm really honest with you, Tom and I did Honky Tonks, then we did Hippo, and then we sold those 2 businesses and we did the brewery together. We're still in the brewery together. We've been working together for almost 10 years.
Yeah.
And if I'm honest, like, we'd never brewed commercially before. We actually didn't really probably know as much as maybe would have been ideal about brewing. And so we brought we recognized that pretty early, and we brought on a brewer from San Diego at a brewery that we loved over there called Coronado. Yeah. And
I know it well. My best friend lives there, and every time we've gone over there, he lives in North Park as well.
Nice.
All connected.
Yeah, which was pretty cool. So he actually moved over here, and we used to throw these wild staff parties for the Hippo and Honky Tonks, and all the staff would come down the house at the coast with a grass driveway that went right down almost to the lagoon at North Turris. And so we'd do slip and slide down this driveway, and then, it was always a dress up party. And this year, I think it was a bad taste party. So I came as a bride. So I was in a full wedding dress, and there was other accoutrements that made it bad taste.
Oh, that's a terrifying image. I'm not going to be able to sleep tonight.
The first time I met our head brewer, just got off the plane. There was people everywhere in, swimmers doing slip and slide. There were kangaroos everywhere, and his new boss was there in a wedding dress, pretty out of control, soaking wet. And so that was the first time I met Wade, and he came out and checked out Australia for a week and absolutely loved it. We showed him around Canberra. He went to a multicultural festival, took him up Mount Ainslie, took him out for a hike, took him surfing down at Browley. Really, really turned it on.
Then he met the love of his life, which happens to be my fiance's good friend.
Yeah, exactly right. So that, we organised that as well just to get him to stay out here.
I said, hey, Belle, would you mind hanging around?
That's really... it's a really cool thing.
So can I ask this? In terms of Capital Brewing Co., to most normal people such as myself, I look at that and I just think that's a massive business that's making commercial quantities of stuff that is shipped out everywhere. Half the places I go to, it's already there. It gives me kind of pride and pleasure to say, hey, I know this guy. I probably sound like so many other people that say that, but I actually do. Yeah. But are you already a couple of years thinking in advance? And is there something bigger with it? Or is this where it gets to, and then you're going to get bored and you'll have a different thing in 5 years' time?
Yeah, no, so we've kind of come to the end of our first 3-year plan, which laid out, what we wanted to achieve in those 3 years in terms of volume and efficiency and a few other sort of KPIs that we attach to the business. And we're approaching the end of that, and we're developing the next 3 years on where we want to be. And part of our strategy has been really localizing our footprint. So rather than trying to send beer to Melbourne and Brisbane and Perth and have staff in all of those areas, we've got the budget to have staff in all of those areas, but that budget is deployed just in Canberra, Sydney and Newcastle. So it's super concentrated. And we've still got a huge amount of growth that we can achieve in Sydney. So that's really...
So your foreseeable future is in that space. Yeah,
exactly right. Yeah. And there's still a lot that we're working on in that business. And
do you ever think of what might be in store for you, say, for example, in 20 years' time, if I can project that far?
Yeah, I don't know. I just see what happens.
Yeah. So you kind of look at the opportunities that come at hand within some scope around you, but you're not, this is what I was getting back to originally, that there wasn't a point as a young bartender where you thought, I'm going to own a brewery.
No.
There's a logical path by which you ended up there, because you connected your love of entertaining, your love of the business and in financial modeling side of stuff, with obviously owning venues, then a party, then you dropped out of that into obviously what is a gigantic production of a particular product. But all of them are somewhat linked together in many ways in terms of entertainment and the beverage component and bartending. It's all in there. Yeah. But you didn't see that at the very beginning.
It's interesting. No, I definitely didn't see that at the very beginning, but it is interesting to join those dots. And it's also important to note that, I have had periods of time, especially when we hadn't made the decision yet to fully commit to the brewery and to sell Honky Tonks and Hippo, where I was I spent maybe 6 months just being very lost, and not really knowing what I wanted to do with myself. I wasn't super into the idea of the bars anymore. I'd kind of had enough of doing that, but I didn't really know what I wanted to move on to. And then we were still working on the brewery, and when Tom and I really committed to going, we're gonna do this. This is, because we were going to put the brewery next to Honky Tonks at one stage.
Yep.
That was a potential thought. And we pretty quickly realized that wasn't going to be a great option economically to do that. So we started to look for a larger production site. But yeah, that was a pretty wild period there.
Actually, just on that, if you could give yourself advice, so in other words, with everything that you know now, and you could go back in time to that period where you felt a little bit lost, what bit of advice would you have given yourself to pull you out of that, to give you direction?
Surf more waves.
Come on.
Yeah.
No, seriously, I'm always wondering about that, because, quite often we think if you get into that situation again, because, we can relive moments, what could you have possibly known to make that part easier? What bit of advice you could have worked with?
There's nothing that you could have done, because, I think that you have to go through the difficulty. But I guess it's really how you internally respond to that difficulty. So if you respond to it with anxiety and angst, which is, pretty much what I did, it would have been far better to submit to that situation and sort of trust in the world and know that, everything's kind of temporary. If you didn't realize, I actually went for a period of time to go and see a energy healing guru. Yeah, and she gave me a lot of advice through that period, which was pretty interesting.
And useful?
And very useful.
Do you still reflect on it these days?
I do. Yeah, she was amazing. And I had about, I can't remember how many sessions, but around 6 or 8 sessions with her. And
so what drove you to seek her out, or that particular assistance, as opposed to something else?
Well, someone just talked to me about it one day, and they said, this person does amazing things with, for me. I didn't really tell them about how I was feeling, but they were talking to me about how they were feeling and how they went and saw this person. And I was like, well, what do I have to lose?
Okay.
I may as well, I owned 2 profitable businesses at that stage. Like, I wasn't financially destitute. I wasn't in a terrible situation, but I wasn't going anywhere. You know what I mean? I was just kind of marking time and I get really uncomfortable doing that if things aren't progressing if we're not moving forwards and developing what's going on and building on ourselves, then I just get really agitated. So, if I could have reflected on that, it would have been to sort of ride the wave a little bit more calmly.
So enjoy the process with these ups and downs. Yeah, because for a moment I thought you meant ride the waves as in literally go out and get some surf. And I'm like, Laurence, that's not an answer.
Well, no, exactly. But you should have done that. You should have gone, well, things aren't really going anywhere. I'm not that busy at the moment. So maybe I'll use that time to just go
to enjoy it.
To enjoy it. Yeah. Because there's no dress rehearsals, right? You don't get a second opportunity to come back and do it again. So it's, but anyway, we worked like absolute mad on the brewery after that once we committed to it, and
because it gave you that purpose and that focus, I guess.
Exactly, and that was really nice. And then it's a challenge as well when you've got a family to strike the balance of how much do you work and how much do you spend on family.
So how do you do that?
I have some pretty strong delineation between when I work and when I don't, and I don't sit around on my phone and look at emails while I'm at home. Mm-hmm. I don't get my laptop out while my family's, preparing for dinner or getting ready for bed or any of that kind of stuff. I kind of, once the kids are in bed, I'll get my laptop out and I go, I'm doing half an hour or 60 minutes, and that's kind of, or 2 hours or however much work I've got to do, and then that's the break line. Mm-hmm. So that you don't end up allowing those two kind of things to bleed, which can be very insidious, and you end up just not really paying attention to anything that you're doing.
Yeah.
So it's really challenging, and my wife and I both, constantly try and work on that. So she's probably got a little bit more of a blurred line than I do, but she's got a different kind of job as well. So.
Yeah, of course. That's actually a really interesting point, because I think that whole, life balance, time balance, whatever you want to call it, is something that people often think about.
Yeah, actually thinking about your diary at various points throughout the time I've known you has frightened me. I can't fathom the amount of work that you managed to pump out. But that is a challenge, and it's I've become much better at saying no to certain things.
Yeah, and I think and I guess the reason that you can say no, what gives you the strength to do that, is because you realize not only the importance of doing that, but also the bad cost if you didn't.
Yeah, well, there's a couple of things there. One of them is that, I've got an older daughter that's 18 now. She was 5 when I met her mum, and I've seen how quickly she grows up. She's grown up, and so I want to make sure that, maybe I do have some regrets where I probably worked a little bit more than would have been ideal when she was younger. So I want to, try and not repeat that. Yeah. But also, I really love working, and I really love doing what I do at the brewery. And I've also got a responsibility to our staff to make sure that I'm doing my job as effectively as I possibly can, because they rely on me to make sure that, Tom and I are both responsibly running that business. I mean, we employ 60 people there.
That's huge.
That, that a lot of them have kids, a lot of them have mortgages, and I take that responsibility pretty seriously. So, it's a balance between that and family time and personal time, which there isn't much of anymore. But yeah.
There's one interesting thing, and I'll put this to you and tell me if I've got this wrong or right. All the way through me knowing you, you've always been very much an outdoor guy. You obviously love nature. But if I think of the outdoor stuff that you do, it's all pretty intense, or at least used to be. I think all of the stuff that you've always been doing, especially maybe in the last decade or so, has got a certain amount of risk and control, and a balance between risk and control, because the stuff you were doing was quite full on. I remember you telling me about some of the accidents that you've witnessed, and how you kept cool under the pressure, and what you did at the time. I get the feeling that maybe that character in you, or that personal balance of enjoying a bit of risk, of the adrenaline rush, but then having that control over it at the same time to be able to succeed, is kind of the same thing as in your business life, because there's risk in all the stuff that you're doing. Like you said, there's 60 people that you've got. Who knows where the industry is going to go? And even at the time, it's all calculated, but there's definitely a risk. And I think you get quite excited by that, and it's a bit of a driver. Would I be right?
Yeah, you're definitely right. Like, calculated risk is, something that I really enjoy. In terms of like the climbing that I've done, yes, I guess it is. Some people would look at it as being just straight dangerous, but if you effectively manage the risk, which is what you should do when you're doing rope sports, then it just becomes a high risk activity, not a dangerous activity. So it only becomes risky if you're not managing the risk. But it's actually incredibly meditative. So it's a really strong form of meditation, or almost meditation for me, when you're climbing or canyoning, and you can't really think about anything but what you're doing right then and there.
All right.
So I really enjoy that element of it. Unfortunately, this summer it's not exactly been a great year for outdoor sports in the wilderness. So yeah, I haven't, and I'm starting to get quite agitated from not having gone out. And I got this new canyon pack. I've had the same canyon pack for 15 years, and the thing's basically shredded. And I got this new canyon pack at the end of last canyoning season.
I haven't been able to use it. Don't worry. Sure. There's always next year, and there's always skiing, and there's every other things that you do.
In answer to your question, I've dialed back a lot of the stuff, because climbing is a full on activity in terms of time. So I opt now for a bit more canyoning, but climbing's just boomed phenomenally in popularity. Like when I was climbing a lot, you wouldn't see anyone up Barumba Rocks, and you might see one other person, at the bottom of Piddington, the Blue Mountains, or wherever you're climbing. And now, I went to Barumba the other day, and the place was bloody crawling in people. And the gear shop guys are just telling me that, all this gear that we used to sell to 4 or 5 guys in Canberra and we almost took off the shelf is now just walking out of the place. And
right.
I'm like, yeah, right, okay, interesting. So, yeah.
One other thing I want to ask too is a lot of people know you in Canberra just because you've been involved with a lot of things that have been quite popular on the entertainment circuit and bars and everything else. Do you think you're defined by that work? In other words, people know you as Laurence from Capital. Do people perceive you in the right way, do you think?
Well, it's not really something that I think about a lot, actually, if I'm honest with you. And I don't derive my sort of personal identity from my work. I really enjoy it, but it's not something that is, that I'm super emotionally attached to from an identity point of view.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I haven't actually really thought about that much. I think some people probably think I'm fairly strange, because it's not uncommon for me to get around in some pretty different outfits, and I grow a lot of different vegetables in my backyard, and get up to some strange activities, going out climbing, and
sure.
I drove a bloody 2002 Toyota Camry for 11 years. That
sure
was
did.
Fairly shredded, and then I traded that in for a 2012 D-Max, and I get around in that. So I don't know. Look, I'm really not sure what people think, and I'm flattered to hear you say that a lot of people know me, because I wouldn't have really.
They do. I don't think I've ever had a conversation where I said Laurence Kain and people went, who?
So what do people say about me behind my back?
Well, that's probably another podcast.
Yeah.
No, the reason I say that is the more known you become for something, the more singular it becomes. And maybe the reason that I've done these podcasts too is that I'm trying to show the variations in people's personality that we might otherwise known, but they might listen to that story and go, I had no idea he did foreshore, and I had no idea, and that's right, he did work at that bar, and realize that the journeys that we take, kind of make us more complicated than we might seem just in one glance. And I think that's where it comes down to. But it also means that sometimes it's good to actually hide behind, a single perception that people have, and that feels quite right. But sometimes it actually feels a bit shallow, and it makes you think that people don't know you particularly well, But for your reasons, it just seems like you don't really mind either way,
Yeah, I guess I know the people that know me, and I don't need anyone else to know me.
Yeah.
So it's like, you, for example, I'm very comfortable with you, and that's why I can turn up to your house in a pair of pajamas, because I know that you know me.
Almost too comfortable, I would say.
Probably. But yeah, I don't know.
Because the neighbor was looking in, and anyway.
Did she ask my phone number?
It's actually here, but yes.
Yeah, anyway. So yeah, it's interesting. I've not really thought about too much around that before. So.
Nah, probably because it doesn't really matter that much. Actually, maybe I'll flip this the other way around. I'd be interested to know who you look up to. Do you have some people, and I don't know whether that's in the industry or business, whether it's in family, whether it's some friends, whether it's somebody you've never met, but do you have some people that you look up to that kind of influence who you are, the decisions you make?
Yeah, a little bit. Interesting. That's an interesting question as well. Like I sort of look up to different, people and how they've operated their business. I'm reading some books at the moment by a guy called Warren Buffett, who's, a pretty successful investor, and he's got some interesting views. But also the guys from Stone and Wood and the guys from Bolter. But I've actually, had the benefit of the last couple of years of having some experienced guys that we've sought out to come and work with us in the brewery on our board of directors. And I've learned a tremendous amount from them. Michael Brooks, who came, he's retired. He was a director at Carlton United. He was there for 20-something years. And we recognized that we had a bit of a skill shortage in the knowledge, corporate governance and kind of knowledge that he had. And so he came onto our board and with us for about 18 months and just learned a phenomenal amount from him. So it's, the experience of working with someone like that, I know we're digressing a bit now, but it's really broadened my horizons a little bit in terms of what kind of depth of experience certain people have, which has been really interesting. But
they sit in that business. That's where your interests are in terms of people that you look up to.
Yeah, from a business point of view, from like just a family point of view, I guess, or like a personal point of view, I really look up to my parents. My dad, and he's done phenomenally well with his career, and my mum has as well. And they've done a good job of their life.
Do they reckon they expected or presumed that you would go down this path, and that's what you ended up doing, or have you really surprised them?
I was actually not a good student at school. Like I was in quite a lot of trouble. So I would have been quite worried about me if I was them, and I think they were. I think I gave them a bit of a shit time. Okay. But I've given them a pretty easy time in later life because, they've got...
You made up for it.
I think I'm making up for it. I've delivered the grandchildren and...
See, there's that risk and calculation again. You even make other people...
Yeah, I baited and switched them. And, other people that I've looked up to, I guess my granddad, who's recently passed away, sadly, but he was a pretty strong business mentor for me as well. And he'd been a multinational CEO for a large ventilation and refrigeration company. And he gave me a lot of sage advice, especially around starting up some of the elements of foreshore and just general commercial advice. He was super experienced. So, and American. He'd say, if you don't insure yourself for 2%, you've got rocks in your head.
You took notes.
Yeah. And so he actually gave my brother and I a lot of lectures and advice on investing, and that got us involved in it from quite a young age. And something that you sort of touched on before was, how do you feel about risk and when you put your own money into it, and how do you generate the capital to do this kind of stuff? And a lot of that, where that came from, was actually just me saving my wage as a bartender, and I was buying shares, nothing crazy, and made a bit of capital gain, and I ended up with I think $36,000 in my bank account, and I went and talked to the bank, and I got $60,000 in overdraft, and split the costs with Jeff Drake and Paul as a party to start the first foreshore.
Oh, there you go.
But all I had was $60,000, and I sort of begged, borrowed, and stealed from suppliers, and promised I'd pay them, and paid a bunch of them after the show. And once we got that first show out of the way, it was all pretty good.
So it's interesting. So when you did that, you were how old?
23.
23. So, that's probably pretty good settings for someone 23, I would presume, out of average figures. But what's interesting is, most people's thoughts around that is obviously saving for a house deposit. Mm-hmm. I'm sure that crossed your mind as well, because you wouldn't have thought about...
I never thought saving for a house.
Well, actually, I was just about to say, so that... Is that because that's too active?
It just wasn't very exciting to me.
Well, yeah, exactly.
Yeah. I would be...
Where's the risk, right? You buy a home, it's most likely going to be okay if you just wait long enough.
Yeah, exactly. It's just not very exciting. I'm happy living really anywhere. So it's... I live in a pretty modest house, and I'm cool with that. But it's Yeah, I never thought about saving for a house. I just always thought, I need to save money because then you've got some options.
Yeah.
And it's actually something that I'm quite passionate about now, and that I organize a bit through Capital, is talking to my staff about financial management and talking to them about, if they want to hear it, talking to them about their superannuation. And I get the guys from Host Plus in for different groups of staff, and they do presentations to them about how they can, salary sacrifice a little bit into super and how that compounds up. And a lot of them have never thought about it. And if they're 19 to 35 years old and they start really actively doing that, they're going to end up being a lot better off. They're lessons that they won't forget.
Are they receptive? Do they take your advice?
Look, I don't really get around dishing out advice to staff too much because it's not really my business to do that. But
no, so the reason that I ask is, with all our best intentions, a lot of people have to live through their own mistakes is not the right word, through their own journeys, so to speak, to get to places.
And I don't think it's right to go around trying to dish out investment advice to people that haven't come asking for it.
And,
I'm not a financial advisor or a financial planner, and so I don't do that. But what I do is provide the forum for someone from the superannuation company to come and talk to them about what is superannuation and what does it mean. And because a lot of them haven't thought about it.
Yeah.
And so what was really cool for me was, after we have those kind of sessions, and 3 of the staff I've just gone and set up my salary sacrificing. I'm putting $25 a week into salary sacrificing. And I'm like, well, shit, that's really cool. If he does that for the rest of his life, I've just made the guy $750,000 in compound interest by the time he retires. And so that's a pretty, it's a pretty valuable contribution you can make to someone. And, if a young person comes to me and goes, look, can you give me some financial advice, or, ask me a question around that, I'm always more than happy to sit down and spend time with them. And I'll give them my spreadsheets, that I've developed over a reasonable period of time.
I think I need your spreadsheets.
Yeah,
sounds great.
Lots of people need my spreadsheets. My wife wishes I never had my spreadsheets.
Oh, that's awesome. But it sounds nice, because it sounds like there is a nurturing component to the business as well. And it goes back to what you were saying before, that you feel the responsibility of looking after the people that are working for you, which I can't imagine having 60 people relying on me in terms of the business that I run. I mean, I work with a lot of people and all my different things, but not in this kind of direct responsibility.
Yeah. One of the biggest responsibilities that I feel in that business, but beyond making sure that we can pay our bills and pay all our staff, is people's safety, because obviously it's a relatively hazardous environment. And that's something that I've never, for sure, you had to deal with that, but it was mainly patrons. But, when you've got people that are working for you dealing with straight caustic, that we use to disinfect tanks and high pressure tanks, and high pressure acid in a tank, and all this kind of different gnarly stuff that can really go wrong. We've invested a tremendous amount in safety, so that's a huge responsibility that I feel. And retention of staff is something that I'm really proud of. Retaining the right people. I've got staff that are coming up to their 10-year anniversary working with me, that are currently still working, in different capacities at the brewery. So being able to retain good people is, I think one of the most important skills that you can have in a business. And unless you actually care about the people that work for you, then you can't do that. So I think that's one of our competitive advantages, is being able to attract and retain good people.
Yeah.
Because if you don't have good people and they're not engaged and they're not stoked to be there, they're not going to deliver effectively, and your business is, you might have success for a while, but it won't go on for that long.
Yeah.
So if you want to have a really long-term business that sustains itself, retention, I think, is critical.
Yeah, no, you're so right. I mean, it's funny when I think of the corporate culture that I'm in, being surrounded by good people is probably the number one thing. I couldn't achieve a quarter of the things if it wasn't for the right skill set. And not only that, but the right kind of team fit, people that understand each other, appreciate each other's point of view, balance each other out, that whole entire thing. And then retention is always my second thing, that once you've got that right, you try to keep it. Now, people move. It's normal. There's changes in their lives. So what you then need to do is just fit that piece back in. Even if it's not the same one, just try to keep on building on the same culture that you've got. Yeah. I find that very important. So, I mean, it makes perfect sense that that'd be so important to you as well. Yeah,
and also I think the most important part, one of the most important parts is retention, is how you move on the people, how quickly you move on the people that aren't right, that don't fit with the organization and gelling with the rest of the team, and doing that in a really fair and upfront and open way, and not messing with people, but at the same time, like, not everyone works and fits and
most certainly
and delivers at the level that, if you've got a team of really high achievers and you get someone in there that's kind of wanting to chill, it doesn't always work out. So anyway.
Well, I'm talking about retention and letting people go. It's probably time we should move you off.
Yeah.
I mean, it's probably your bedtime, I'm presuming.
It is now. Actually. What time is it?
It's almost 9 o'clock.
Yeah,
oh, no, my God, it's almost 9:30.
It's definitely my bedtime.
Wow.
I've got a 5 a.m. start.
Getting those glassy eyes.
Yeah.
I'll get some milk and cookies in here. You'll be asleep on the carpet.
Get the patchouli oil out.
Well, look, thanks again so much for coming in. I really hope that this wasn't too late for you.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
All right. Thanks so much, mate. It was great talking to you.
Yeah, thanks, man.